Good evening, you're now watching Qnews and we begin tonight's bulletin with the latest developments in Gaza. Hamas has confirmed its approval of Egypt's proposal to create a community support committee through inclusive national mechanisms. Palestinian Hamas movement announced that its delegation concluded meetings in Cairo, where it held in-depth discussions with Fatah on forming a committee to manage Gaza, aiming to implement the nationally agreed upon comprehensive agreement for achieving national unity and ending division. Additionally, the delegation met with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine leadership to discuss political and field developments in Gaza and the West Bank. The United Nations General Assembly has resumed its emergency session on Gaza, with Palestine's UN representative Riyad Mansour delivering a strong condemnation of what he described as Israel's ongoing genocide. Mansour also criticized attacks on U.S. institutions and violations of international law, calling for an immediate ceasefire and an end to massacres. He urged the enforcement of International Court of Justice ruling, emphasizing the need for Palestinian self-determination and the establishment of a sovereign state based on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. He concluded by underlining the urgency of ending decades of occupation and apartheid.
Must be a turning point, the beginning of the end.
The head of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, Yunus al-Khatib, has condemned Israeli actions obstructing humanitarian efforts in Gaza, calling for an immediate ceasefire and unrestricted access to aid. Speaking at a conference in the central West Bank, al-Khatib stressed the need to uphold international law to safeguard civilians and humanitarian workers. The event also paid tribute to 21 PRCS staff members who lost their lives since October 7, 2023, highlighting the vital role of volunteers and calling for their protection worldwide. Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 12 Palestinians and injured dozens more across Gaza, including in northern Gaza and in the Palestinian city of Rafah. Drones targeted the Indonesian hospital and a displaced family shelter near Kamal Adwan Hospital, killing 7. A drone also struck civilians near Shuja'iyya Cemetery, killing 3. 2 others died in Khirbet el-Ads. Israeli occupation forces have bombed a house in Gaza's al-Nusayrat camp, killing 3 civilians and injuring several others. Strikes also targeted Gaza City, the Palestinian Rafah City, and Khan Yunis, while intermittent shelling hit al-Mughazi camp. Rescue crews in the Al Junaina neighborhood recovered 3 bodies amidst the destruction. The attacks across central and southern Gaza have left widespread devastation and numerous casualties. And for more analysis, we now move to Riham in our newsroom. To you, Riham.
Thank you, Mona. For further analysis on Hamas's acceptance of the Egyptian proposal, we're joined from Cairo by the Ahram newspaper managing editor, Ashraf El-Ashri. Welcome to Qnews, sir. Firstly, let's start off by asking, what are the key aspects of Hamas's approval of the Egyptian proposal regarding the formation of the Community Support Committee?
Certainly, there are, due to the regional, international variables that pushed Hamas to make some sort of an understanding with Fatah movement and for ceasefire and to accept some of the Egyptian and international proposals. Hamas thinks that things aren't the same compared to Hezbollah, and the leaders of Hamas, the first line and the second, such as Haniya and Sanwar and Mohammed al-Dif, and they've unfortunately been assassinated. And there is an international variable that the US administration is about to leave the White House, and Trump is going to be more violent in dealing with the Middle East files. As we followed the statement of Trump that threatened with the hell with respect to not to release the detainees. Hamas wants to change the equilibrium to maintain what is left from its force as well as the rest, what is left from the Palestinian people following the genocide. And the situation deteriorated. That's in a very bad matter, and there is a semi-famine as well as the starvation war adopted by the army of the occupied Israeli forces in the Gaza Strip.
So, sir, how does the Cairo meeting between Hamas and Fatah play a crucial role when it comes to shaping the future of ceasefire talks, given all the factors that you've just stated when it comes to the future of what's going to happen there?
Let me talk to you frankly that for the first time for a long month, for the beginning of a positive solution on the both sides, whether the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in the light of the proposed Egyptian proposal, and between the meeting between Hamas and Fatah through the committee to be convened that concluded all the factions that accepted it. In fact, had asked sometimes to offer the proposal draft before President Mahmoud Abbas to be ratified. Upon the approval of Fatah, will return back to Cairo in the upcoming week to examine forming the committee that would include 15 personality of independent and technocrat experts to run Gaza for another year in order to have or to play a vital role in the case of the ceasefire with the Egyptian-American effort. I see that the situation would be approaching some sort of a solution through the Palestinian rapprochement and to cut the way before Netanyahu to stay in the Gaza Strip.
Okay, so sir, how do you assess the potential for achieving a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza after these discussions in Cairo?
Certainly, if the efforts of the ceasefire has succeeded and the US side to accept will be coming within the upcoming weeks, as in Israel will be convened to examine the Egyptian proposal and suggestions for ceasefire. Upon that will be have some sort of the committee of the social support to run the situation in Gaza in delivering the medical trade and social services as well as the finance also, and to manage the Rafah crossing and to be at the beginning to examine the withdrawal of Israel in Gaza according to the Egyptian proposal, and to call upon everyone for a gradual withdrawal, just to start the first step of the ceasefire, and then the committee, the independent one of experts and independent to run the things, and to be the beginning in inspiring of what happened in Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah, which is the pursuit and the Egyptian proposal of that matter.
So, sir, how do you assess Egypt's mediation efforts during the ceasefire negotiations?
Certainly, it is the most distinguished and excellent that has more flexibility, as Cairo is the pivotal and the main role that highlighted in the past few months, as well as delivering the humanitarian aid and played a great role for the Palestinian people through the Egyptian steps before the United Nations, headed and presided by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. But I think that the Egyptian efforts that is being praised by the international community and the regional country, Cairo is the main player through the conflict between Hamas and Israel, and I think we will succeed again for the Palestinian people interest. And the praise of the international community on the success of the Egyptian negotiations and efforts and mediation efforts through a very political initiative for the people of Gaza Strip.
Okay, that was Al Ahram newspaper managing editor Ashraf Al-Ashri. Thank you so much for your insights and thank you for joining us. Back to you now, Muna, in the studio.
Thank you so much, Rihan, for the analysis. And an Israeli airstrike on Gaza City's Sheikh Radwan neighborhood has killed 10 Palestinians, injuring others after targeting a house. That comes as Israeli occupation forces detained 28 Palestinians across the West Bank, including children and a wounded individual taken from a hospital. The raids involved home destruction, assaults and threats. Jordan's King Abdullah II has urged an end to settler violence against Palestinians and the immediate cessation of violations at Jerusalem's holy sites. Earlier in Washington, he called for a Gaza ceasefire, a two-state solution, and sufficient humanitarian aid. Meeting U.S. lawmakers, Jordan's king emphasized the need for sustained relief access in Gaza, support for Lebanon's ceasefire, and stability in Syria. Donald Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is conducting diplomatic visits to Qatar and Israel ahead of the U.S. presidential transition, aiming to facilitate a Gaza ceasefire and detainee release before January 20th.
Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, has embarked on diplomatic visits to Qatar and Israel ahead to the U.S. presidential transition. In late November, Witkoff, set to assume his role under Trump's administration, held separate meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. His primary focus is facilitating a ceasefire in Gaza and securing the release of detainees before Trump's inauguration on January 20th. These efforts come over 14 months of unsuccessful negotiations aimed at establishing a lasting ceasefire between Israel and Hamas and addressing the release of detainees. While the Biden administration is aware of Witkoff's engagements, it has emphasized that it remains the primary actor leading negotiations for a Gaza ceasefire. The Biden administration does not view direct coordination with Witkoff as necessary, considering his efforts more exploratory than formal. Previously, Trump issued a warning of severe consequences should detainees in Gaza remain captive by his inauguration. Secretary of State Antony Blinken characterized Trump's statement as underscoring the urgency for a ceasefire and detainee release, a priority echoed across political divides. The Gaza situation highlights the pressing need for a ceasefire as diplomatic efforts gain momentum. Both immediate measures and sustained strategies are critical to preventing further escalation and addressing the ongoing humanitarian crisis.
Syria's United Nations envoy has urged the UN to adopt a neutral, objective approach under the Chemical Weapons Convention. During a Security Council session on Syria, Syria's envoy stated that Syria has fulfilled its commitment to the convention, while many countries have called for action to stop Israel's alleged use of chemical weapons. He accused some states of supporting Israel's weapons development and criticized certain Western nations for targeting Syria through concerted efforts, undermining fairness and the principles of international conventions.
لقد بات واضحا
كل المستهدفين هم مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Lebanese media has reported that U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein is set to visit Beirut soon to monitor progress on implementing the ceasefire agreement. According to media sources, the visit is aimed at supporting the Oversight Committee tasked with ensuring adherence to the terms of the truce, which was established to prevent further hostilities.
As planned, if we made progress, I would go to Israel and make those additional discussions there based on the
Lebanese caretaker Foreign Minister Abdullah Abu Habib has met with Canadian Ambassador Stephanie McComb to discuss Lebanon's post-ceasefire situation. Abu Habib urged Canada and other nations to support Lebanon's reconstruction and military efforts. McComb reaffirmed Canada's support for Lebanon's security forces and stressed the need for a new president and government. Abu Habib also met with Australian Ambassador Andrew Barnes to discuss Israeli violations and the importance of border delineation and Israel's withdrawal for stability. Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati has announced that the week following the ceasefire agreement has seen over 60 Israeli violations. During a cabinet session, Mikati confirmed the ceasefire's continuation over the past 2 days, expressing hope it leads to lasting stability, though remaining cautious about potential violations. He also urged Lebanese citizens abroad to support the country's recovery, emphasizing unity, determination, and faith in Lebanon's future. Lebanon's caretaker Education Minister Abbas Halabi has outlined the next steps for the education sector following the declaration of a ceasefire. Halabi confirmed that the Ministry of Education will continue prioritizing education while adapting to the evolving situation. With many teachers and families assessing damage or returning home, he noted that public schools, some used as shelters, are seeing families leave. He urged school principals to assess the facilities and report their findings to the relevant authorities. Moving on to Russia, Moscow struck a Ukrainian military air base while Ukraine reported successfully repelling multiple attacks from Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry reported strikes on Ukrainian military airports, ammo depots, and personnel concentration, while air defense downed dozens of Ukrainian drones. Russian forces also targeted Ukrainian personnel and equipment in Kursk. Meanwhile, Ukraine's General Staff stated that Ukrainian forces repelled multiple Russian attacks after over 100 battles in Kharkiv, Pokrovsk, and Kurakhov. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has hosted Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Alan Brizet, in Kiev. After the meeting, Zelensky posted on X the pair had discussed the need to establish a tribunal to try the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine. Russia was expelled from the Council, Europe's foremost human rights body, in the month after the war started. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has said he had imposed sanctions on Georgian former Prime Minister Bedzina Ivanishvili and some members of Georgia's government. Zelensky imposed sanctions on 19 individuals, including Georgia's State Security Service Chief and Interior Ministry. Zelensky accused the individuals on whom he imposed sanctions of selling the interests of Georgia and its people and called on Ukraine's European partners and the United States to act. The 10-year sanctions include restrictions on financial operations, on entry to Ukraine, and on property rights in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has worked to shore up allied support for Ukraine ahead of President-elect Donald Trump's return to the White House in January. Biden's goal is to put Ukraine in the best position possible to negotiate a settlement, and has come as Moscow has made significant advances in the conflict and North Korean troops have moved to assist Russian forces. By contrast, Trump has been skeptical of the U.S. assistance and has helped the assistance and has suggested that his administration will sharply curtail or end.
Putin and Russia have any intent of doing that, then again, we want to make sure it's from a position of strength.
And moving on to our economic sector, the Bitcoin surged above the $100,000 for the first time in the cryptocurrency's history. This came after President-elect Donald Trump chose crypto advocate Paul Atkins as his nominee to head the Securities and Exchange Commission after the announcement. Bitcoin was at an all-time high of $103,619, a surge of about 6%. Well, that brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Here is what we've been covering. Hamas agrees to Egypt's proposal for a community support committee using national mechanisms. Syria's UN envoy calls for neutrality under the Chemical Weapons Convention framework. And the US envoy Amos Hochstein will visit Beirut to assess ceasefire progress.
Based on the conversations here and see what we can do.
This concludes our news bulletin for tonight. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.